did live in Tokyo, Japan for 5 years. It's a place which still holds a dear place in my heart. Seeing what's happening there lately, this growing far-right movement, the anti-foreigner sentiment. I've been watching it closely. I've been a little bit of research. I'm by no means an expert, but it keeps reminding me of something that I studied a long time ago. See, I was never an anime fan. I'm not very linguistic. I know a lot of people enjoy studying the language and whatnot, but the reason I became interested in Japanese society in the first place was through my love of horror films. I grew up in the 90s. I mean, I was a child in the 90s, but I was, watching the films that I shouldn't be, such as Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Halloween H2O, my introduction to the greatest horror villain of all time, Michael Myers, slasher renaissance of the 90s, something that we'd seen before in the 70s. I mean, I'd not literally seen it, but people had seen before in the 70s. It was making a comeback. Over in Japan at that time, something very different was happening. Japanese horror was having its own glory period around that time. Films like Ringu, Cairo, Ju-on, Audition, Battle Royale. I mean, there's many more that we can talk about. I used to love these films. I used to find them terrifying. And one of the reasons I found them so terrifying was because they were so different. Now, don't get me wrong, Michael Myers was scary. Ghostface was scary when I was a kid, but there was something very unnerving about women and children being the antagonists. It was only as I got older and I started to study film and look at it more analytically that I started to think, why was that? Why were Japanese filmmakers using children and women to scare people at a time when American filmmakers were using, men, usually masked, big, strong, intimidating? It's like the complete opposite, yet to me, it was more scary. And when you look deeper into the context of those films, the themes of those films, they're all rooted in social anxiety. Some of the directors have actually spoken about the themes they explored, and some of them are more presumed, some of them are inferred. If we look at something like Audition, absolutely beautiful woman, Asami. This is coming at the end of the lost decade of the 90s, when social structures, family structures in Japan are starting to change because they are going through a difficult time, an economic recession. Women are starting to become more prominent in the family in terms of working career women, the reflection of the changing role that women were playing in society. And obviously, in a society that was predominantly run by men, still is in many ways, I think that did cause some fear and some anxiety, but not just women, children. If you look at films like Ju-on, The Grudge, or Battle Royale, we're looking at the lost innocence. Things were happening in Japan around that time. It was starting to become very apparent that society was not quite as perfect as it seemed. If you look at Battle Royale, it is literally the youth versus the authority, the struggle between those two separate entities. And again, that is a reflection of the fact that a lot of the youth movement at that time was very disenchanted with what they were seeing, the world that they were going into. Obviously 10, 15, 20 years earlier, during Japan's boom, there was stability, there was sort of a guarantee of a certain level of life, but Japan was very different at that time, and the youth were going into a very different workforce. It wasn't just a dynamic between people, it was also the growing influence of technology. If we look at Ringu, the famous videotape, 7 days, 7 days, I think it's been discussed by the director that this was an exploration of the fear of the subliminal messages that were being put out there in the media at that time. Who could you really trust? Could you fully trust what you were being presented to in the TV? Now, nowadays, we second guess everything because of the society we live in, but 25, 30 years ago, this would have been a very new concept, as would have been the internet. Cairo, exploration of loneliness, of isolation in this new technologically developing world. These films always fascinated me back then. They were touching on collective fear, collective anxiety. If we fast forward that to today, you're probably thinking, how are you relating this to this anti-foreigner sentiment here in Japan. The amount of times that I have been online, been into the sort of Japan news sphere in the last 2-3 years and seen foreigner-centric news, whether it be ruining tourist spots, not respecting geisha, damaging historical places, historical monuments, etc. Movies that were exploring those topics historically back in the late 90s, it's been replaced by social media. It's not that Japanese people hate foreigners per se, but more that there is a growing fear and a growing anxiety around this growing influence that foreigners are having on the society. Not just tourists. There are record numbers of foreigners living in Japan at this time. I was one of them. In fact, I left just before COVID. I went back for a year. I have been in and out of Japan myself. The most homogenous societies in the world. The growing influence and the growing number of foreigners. I think people are experiencing fear in the sense of, is their culture, their history, their population, is it going to be diluted by foreigners? Now, coming from the UK, that idea seems kind of, a little bit dramatic, because the UK has been a very mixed culture for a long time now. Japan has avoided that for so long. It has maintained who it is. It's one of the reasons why it's so popular now amongst tourists, because it is literally in certain places like going back in time. But this isn't just the last 5 years, the tourism boom we're talking about. This is all deeper than that. For years now, decades, Japan's economy has been stagnant, and because of this stagnant economy, people aren't having babies. Anybody who's been in or around Japan the last 10, 20 years knows the population is declining. The workforce that are going into retirement, there aren't enough people to replace them. One of the suggested solutions to that problem is opening up to foreigners more. Will they open the door? Will they make it easier for foreigners to come in? Will they make society easier for foreigners to function? Well and good letting people in, but are they going to actually embrace this change? Are they actually going to let people in and sort of embrace different cultures in the process? And I think that is where the main anxiety is coming from. I think it's all coming to a head with this political party, Sanseito, I believe they're called. I think they are literally touching a nerve, fanning a fire that has been there for a long time. The fear that Japan is disappearing and a huge change needs to occur in order for it to survive, combined with this continuous social media bombardment of negativity regarding foreigners. Not about the individual, it's about the collective idea of what letting more foreigners into the country is going to do. I think this political party has sensed anxiety, it's sensed fear, and it is playing on that. Filmmakers of the late 90s played on certain societal anxiety, societal fears when they were making their films, exploring those topics and sort of presenting them through the form of horror. During my 5 years there, I never experienced any direct racism, any anti-foreigner sentiment. I never felt truly uncomfortable. There were certain things which were difficult. There were certain things which probably would have been easier if I was Japanese, but I don't think it was a case of like me being a foreigner. It's just the fact that I wasn't fully capable of following things the Japanese way. Anyway, hope this one's been interesting enough, guys. If you've got any comments, let me know down below, and I'll see you in the next one.